So before we start, I'm going to say a few things tonight, and then and, uh, I once again I kind of feel like at the very least acknowledge that the world is in trouble. And I've been, and I'm going to give you some resources actually, if people are interested, and some of you may be far more informed than I around these issues of race and diversity and racism and all the rest. But I've been, what I was going to say is that I've been, this week kind of got me focusing on looking at issues around race and being a white person, and I was reading a book called Mindful of Race by Ruth King. Really, really good book. And it happens that I'm mentoring in a teacher training, and it happens that we have actually 2 sessions on what's called DEI, if you're not familiar with that, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then I was watching some videos today, and I realized that just the fact that I can choose at times to pay attention to these issues and other times to just forget about them is part of my position of privilege. There's a crisis, and let me pull out that book that I have that I haven't looked at in a while, think about race. And then I go back to just being, a white person who doesn't really recognize that I am part of a race. So I'm trying to take responsibility for that. And I have a 22-year-old daughter who just graduated from UC Berkeley with a degree in political economy. And she is engaged, and she's been helping me since she was in high school to learn. And so we've been having the family, and we had some friends for dinner last night, and conversation about race among white people is really interesting. So one of the books that I really recommend, I think just really helped me a lot, is helping me, is called White Fragility. And I'm sure some of you know this work. I'm not trying to, again, claim to be any kind of expert. I think it's Beverly D'Angelo, and white fragility is just a really interesting topic, because it's like, white people, we can get really upset, like if we get challenged, and it's like, it's just an interesting concept. And then finally, Larry Yang's book, Awakening Together. Really, really great book. Some of you, I think, were at the retreat at Spirit Rock where Larry came and spoke a couple of years ago. And so anyway, if you're interested in exploring these issues, so again, I don't want to try to make this, I'm not going to, take us far off our main themes here, but again, I just feel like I have to acknowledge that. And I have to acknowledge too that I'm just, today I was just exhausted and I'm just drained, and it's a really hard time to be an American, frankly. It's a really painful time, and a scary time. And I'll say on a positive note, a celebratory note, that on Sunday I'll be marking, if not celebrating, certainly marking 35 years of sobriety. Thank you. which is half my life, uh, so not, when I got sober in 1985, I didn't really envision this. uh, and and I remember going to meetings when I was even like 7 or 8 years sober and seeing people that were in their 30s of sobriety, and there was kind of like, you know, uh, glowing people up on a hill or something, which I am not, but that's how it, it seemed from there. So it's remarkable to get to this place, and doesn't give me any more. I'm only sober today, as we say. My daughter, who's not an alcoholic, has a 6-pack of sparkling, hard sparkling shit. I don't know what they invent this stuff, like, just to keep you, if you're not addicted yet. And she'll have one, and then a couple days later she'll have another one. I don't understand her. I didn't really raise her right. I'm still hoping that she'll develop a problem so I can become her sponsor. Okay, yeah, that would work well. All right. Well, it's nice to see people smiling. I can tell you're laughing, which is good. Good. For those who come to my regular class at Spirit Rock, I usually try to get things going with some kind of goofy stuff. So there you go. I'm glad we can get on a lighter note. We all need it. So this class is really helping me in this time to have you guys to come and see and hang out with, and I'm kind of excited about talking about the higher power topic tonight. So let's get on with some sitting. I will say, I wish there was a way for everybody to be like unmuted in a way that just like there'd just be like rustling and stuff. But if I unmute things, it gets all like crackly and whatever. So I should get like some kind of a background noise machine that makes it sound like you're in a meditation hall with a bunch of people. Maybe we can, I don't know if we can download something like that. All right. So let's sit. And just coming into awareness of your body and your posture. It's helpful to sit in an upright way, the way that you can be relatively still. Really, the stillness of sitting then helps us to support the mind in developing more clarity and stillness itself. You can close your eyes, or you can just lower your gaze, just really taking the attention out of the visual field. And I like to start a sitting just by kind of feeling where I'm at right now. Just what energies or moods or sensations are present, rather than immediately trying to direct my attention, sort of being opened. And sometimes I'll notice, oh, wait, there's this mood here right now. Okay, or maybe not. Or I'll notice, wow, I actually feel quite calm already. So just to acknowledge where you're starting from. Because in sitting, we're not just inventing a state of mind or creating a state of mind. We're always working from wherever we are starting, wherever we are feeling, whatever we're experiencing right now. So our day kind of comes with us into our sitting. And then to more intentionally take the attention through the body. I usually go from head to foot. You can go from foot to head. And I usually relax the jaw and let the facial muscles soften. Check the shoulders, see how I'm holding my shoulders. Soften the belly. And often I find it at some point a deep breath kind of naturally arises. And just letting that breath help me to arrive and settle. So there's a sense of intentionally softening and settling the body, as well as a kind of sweeping the attention through to notice the kind of stronger sensations. And also noticing how you're holding the body. The alignment of the posture and the spine. And then very intentionally checking with the mood and any sort of emotional energy in the body. Being aware of sounds in your environment. And just the feeling of the space you're in. Ordinarily, we share a space as meditators. And under these conditions, we are each in our own different space, each one with its own sort of unique ambience. And arriving at the breath. You might start working with the breath by just being aware of the whole breath. In the suttas, it's called the body of breath. Or the air that comes through the nostrils or the mouth and fills the lungs, expands the diaphragm, the belly, and the exhalation. As the belly and diaphragm contract and the lungs empty, the air passes out through the nose again. At times there are other parts of the body like the shoulders, the back, where you'll feel the breath. Then we usually recommend that you make your attention to the breath more targeted. to either the nostrils or the belly. This instruction doesn't actually appear in the suttas, but it's one that's become accepted as a way of concentrating the mind. As we narrow the attention, then the concentration has the capacity to deepen and to strengthen with that focus. It's not always the best way for each individual to work with the breath, but it's a valuable one. If there is some strong emotional energy in the body, it might be better to work with the body of breath, the fullness of the breath, to kind of give space for those feelings to be included in the breath. But if there's nothing really distracting, then to just zero in on a point of sensation can allow the mind to really settle, quiet. And perhaps the greatest challenge, at least at some stages of meditation, is when the mind persistently goes off the meditation object, goes into thinking, spacing out, daydreaming, all the thoughts that appear. The suggestion is that we acknowledge when we become aware that there is thinking, and that we then just come back to the breath. What often intervenes in this process is the judging mind that jumps in to say something about the fact that the mind was wandering. Some judgment or frustration. It's really helpful if you can let go of that kind of thinking, that additional thinking, and just see the wandering mind as a natural process that needs to be acknowledged. Sometimes we'll find that we're not making enough effort, that we need to just direct the attention more clearly, more specifically to the sensations of breath, to really be with them. But sometimes, often enough, that effort isn't enough to counteract the habits of mind, the habitual wandering mind. So just an acceptance of that and a gentle persistence at coming back. That's a more productive response. Then on the other side of intentionality, the intentionality to settle, we can kind of feel into or connect with a natural settling. So it's almost as if we just make the space for or allow the mind and body to settle. We're not pushing them, we're not suppressing thought, just kind of taking a breath and having a sense of openness, spaciousness, calming, settling happening. There can be this kind of sense of a just gradual release, a gradual settling, like you were just slowly letting the air out of a balloon. Okay. So, for those who aren't in the Bay Area, we just went through several days of August, and now it's November again. So the climate is always a little weird here, but it's even weirder. All part of the apocalypse. So fun. On Tuesday, I was talking about a section of One Breath at a Time, Understanding God, and I was reading from some of Ajahn Buddhadasa's work. If you weren't here for that and you're interested, Ajahn Buddhadasa was a Thai meditation master, 20th century, who was very interested in interfaith dialogue and gave a series of lectures on Christianity and Buddhism in the late 60s that I drew from a lot in my first two books. And so that's up on YouTube if you're interested in that talk. And it's also on audio on my website. So Angela's been helping me to get a very efficient system of getting everything up on my website. I also, I just, on that topic, I've mentioned that I've been sort of updating my website. Today I just did like a search for all the podcasts I could find that I've been on, and I got like 8 of them going back to 2005. So those are on my website under the video audio page. So, okay, getting on to the topic of the evening. We're still on higher power, and before I move on to the next section of One Breath at a Time, I wanted to spend another session looking at higher power. And I want to start by reading some pieces from this little pamphlet called Spiritual Milestones of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'll put it in fact, could you do that for me, Angela? Spiritual Milestones in Alcoholics Anonymous. It's one of a series of pamphlets called the Akron Pamphlets. And it so Akron, as you know, is where AA was founded, and it's where Dr. Bob, the co-founder, the less known co-founder of AA, lived, and where Bill Wilson met him. And so Akron continues to be kind of one of the homes of Alcoholics Anonymous, and you can go and visit Dr. Bob's house. I visited it some years ago when I was teaching at the Shambhala Center there. And in any case, they have these pamphlets that Dr. Bob was responsible for. It's sort of odd. It says that he asked a journalist to write them. So it sounds like he kind of sat down and talked to him about the ideas he wanted in them. But the reason I particularly make a point of that is that there's some people who say that Dr. Bob, Dr. Robert Smith, was a born-again Christian, and that he believed that you had to believe in Jesus Christ as your Savior to get sober. And these pamphlets put the lie to that, if it's true that he was involved in it. So I'll read a little bit from Spiritual Milestones. It would be nice if God were a stately old gentleman, benign, with a long gray beard, clothed in flowing white gown, seated on a golden throne, surrounded by angels and archangels. But unfortunately, it is not as simple as that. So we have the sexist language of the 1930s and 40s, and, well, up till pretty presently. We still have sexist language around. But anyway, I'm just going to read it as it is, but just acknowledging that. No man can describe God completely as he is. God being an intangible spirit, conceptions of him often differ as day from night. And I'm just going to skip around a little bit. We find as we become older in AA that it becomes necessary for us to decide for ourselves what it is that we worship. What is this higher power in which we put our faith? What is our conception of God? We should try to know God as he is, as it is. This is a problem that we must solve for ourselves, and it may take long and searching thought. Perhaps you'll find a hint somewhere in literature. Perhaps an understanding clergyman or Dharma teacher can put you on the right track. Perhaps you will gain some knowledge in talks with other AAs. So first of all, just here we are, that's really the spirit of the steps, which is, of course, that, God as we understood him, and it's, a very open door. So further along, it says, the spiritual life is by no means a Christian monopoly. There is not an ethical religion in the world that does not teach to a great extent the principles of love, charity, and goodwill. The Jehovah of the Hebrews is a stern God who will have vengeance if his laws are broken. Yet the great Hebrew prophets taught a message of social justice. Interesting phrase, right? Followers of Muhammad are taught to help the poor, give shelter to the homeless and the traveler, and conduct themselves with personal dignity. Consider the 8-part program laid down in Buddhism: right view, right aim, right speech, right action, right living, right effort, right mindedness, and right contemplation. The Buddhist philosophy, as exemplified by these 8 points, could be literally adopted by AA as a substitute. There's a typo in this. I'm going to read it and then I'll correct it. Could be literally adopted by AA as a substitute for an addition to the 12 steps. Generosity, universal love, and welfare of others, rather than consideration of self, are basic to Buddhism. So I believe that this is supposed to read, could be literally adopted by AA as a substitute for or an addition to the 12 steps, but it reads, could be literally adopted by AA as a substitute for an addition to the 12 steps. So, which doesn't make any sense. So I take it means it could be a substitute for or an addition to the 12 steps. This was like in the 1940s, right? And here it is, according to Dr. Bob's friend, that the 8-part program we know as the Noble Eightfold Path. And much of this is at right view, right aim, which we call right intention today, right speech, right action, which is the 5 precepts, right living, he says, we say right livelihood, right effort, right mindedness, interesting little, miss whatever, mindedness doesn't, and right contemplation. So we say right mindfulness and right concentration. But obviously the larger point I'm trying to make is that here we have in this early 12-step literature an acknowledgement not only of the value of Buddhist teachings of the Eightfold Path, but that might be enough. That's that when I found this, when it was shown to me, it was something of a shock to me. So, and a revelation, and I will say, something I really appreciate. Obviously, that that was there, and one of the founders, and it also really points to, first of all, the misconception that's carried on by so many people that Buddhism is a Christian, or Buddhism is, that the 12 steps are a Christian program. You know, there's Dr. Bob denying that, contradicting that. And, you know, and I've made this argument before, some of you probably heard it, but I'll repeat this idea that when I think about sort of the evolution of AA and other 12-step programs, they started with this very open-minded spirit, but they were the groups that, you know, were formed over the decades were largely Christian, right? And we could characterize them in other ways. I mean, to a great extent, they were male in the beginning, right? White, certainly, middle class, you know, but for our purposes, let's focus on the Christian part. So assume that all these Christians are reading this literature, and they're, just like I filter it through my Buddhist lens, they're filtering it through their Christian lens. And after a while, because there's no other voices in there, you know, in 1955 or 65, there weren't Buddhists coming into meetings going, hey, why are you saying the Lord's Prayer? That's, you know, that was just it. So after a while, I suspect it just, people came to assume that that was what the meaning of the steps and what the real, you know, what it was really about. So that's one way of sort of guessing how that evolved. But, you know, we're now deconstructing that for AA. I hope Bill and Bob appreciate it. Okay, another little piece, actually kind of a large piece, but I just pulled out something that's an extract from my book, A Burning Desire, which is my second book, and it's the one that's just about higher power. And it's largely about the third step, and it's largely about the idea of turning your will and your life over to the Dharma, as we were talking about last time, Dharma God. What would that mean? And that in that book, I take different elements of the Buddhist teachings and Dharma teachings, and kind of have a section on each piece where I talk about how that aspect of Dharma can be seen as a part of higher power. But one of the things I did was, at the beginning of each of those sections, I wrote a little pithy short paragraph that kind of defines that higher power. And so I pulled them all together into one document for my teaching purposes. And I'm going to read a few of these, just for you to get the flavor of Dharma as a higher power. The higher power of karma. The higher power of karma brings results from actions based on the moral fabric of the universe. It is the force behind addiction, recovery, and spiritual growth. We use this power to transform ourselves and our world through intentional thoughts, words, and actions. So we become addicts through karma, through intentional actions, thoughts, words, and actions, and we come into recovery through karma, through intentional thoughts, words, and actions. So that's a power. The higher power of impermanence. The higher power of impermanence is the energy of change that continuously transforms us and our world. Engaging this power helps us see through the illusion of solidity, showing us the futility of clinging and the frailty of life. This power inspires us to let go and to deeply engage life as it is in each moment. So, you know, everything is impermanent. That is something we can't change. It's a power greater than us. And so our relationship to that then is a question. is something we have to address. And so one of the things about these powers, as I look at them, is that they are, whether they are higher or not, kind of depends on how we relate to them. Like if we're fighting with impermanence, with change, then it's just a struggle, right? But if we come into harmony with them, they can help us to grow spiritually. The higher power of mindfulness. The higher power of mindfulness is the power of attention and non-reactivity. It opens us to wisdom and insight through clear seeing. Mindfulness is the foundation of all change as it reveals the truth of the way things are internally and externally. And when I say the foundation of all change, I should maybe have said the foundation of all spiritual growth or spiritual change, positive change. The higher power of love. The higher power of love is the creative force of the universe. It is the underpinning of generosity and service that drives human development. The power of love weakens self-obsession and reveals our interconnectedness. It is the source for joy, compassion, and fulfillment. Maybe one or two more. So then I have a section on the Eightfold Path, and I take each of those. So I'll just go intention. A right intention gives clarity, direction, and resolve on the path. With right intention, we are never entirely lost, no matter how much we stray. Right intention guides us back to ourselves and the values of kindness and wisdom. So just a few thoughts. And the idea here, as I've said, is to kind of see what it means to have the Dharma as a higher power. Buddhadasa does this interesting sort of breakdown of, as I described, he describes 4 elements or 4 aspects of a Dharma God. But the question for us in recovery, and the question that really I was asking continuously as I wrote that book, was, what does it mean, and how do I turn my will and my life over to the Dharma? And so then we have to, as I've said, sort of pull out the specifics of the Dharma and say, okay, what does it mean to turn my will and my life over to intention? Or, strangely, like turning my will and my life over to the power of suffering, But it turns out to actually really work. It really makes sense. It was one of the things that was interesting in developing that book was, as often when you're writing something, you kind of start out with a germ of an idea, but it's only in the writing that you really get clarity over what you're trying to say and putting it together. And what was exciting was that I had this idea, and then it all seemed to come alive and make even more sense as I was writing it. But I'll also say, though, that the ideas are really subtle and complex. They seem to me pretty subtle and complex, so that they don't make for an easy, one sentence. What does it mean to, how can you work step 3 as a Buddhist? Or what's it mean to have the Dharma be a higher power? It really, it requires a lot of teasing out and reflection on that and consideration. One of the things that I have noted, though, in my 35 years of recovery, is that when sometimes people talk about the steps in one way, but they live them in a different way. And usually I find that they tend, when they're really living the steps, they're living them in this kind of Dharma way, much more than they are talking about, oh, God is like doing for me what I could not do for myself, or they're kind of using this language of like, I'm not even, it isn't the Christianity of it, it's the sort of magical thinking of it. Oh, if I prayed and, you know, I got the parking place, or, you know, it was all meant to happen. And it sounds like people are just sort of sitting back and like waiting for God to do stuff for them. But when you really look at how people work the program, usually what people are doing is they're showing up and taking action, right? And being aware and self-reflective and taking responsibility and living in a moral way. I mean, just the fact that, you know, the 5 precepts is to not kill, not to steal, not harm sexually, not harm verbally, not to use intoxicants. Those are part of recovery, and yet they're not in the steps, you know. But anybody who's really worked the steps knows that you can't be screwing up in those ways. And so, like, it's one of the ways that people outside the program don't understand how it works internally. Uh, they don't really realize that there's a lot more to it than sort of written in the steps. I guess I'm digressing a bit there, but well, I think that's probably enough for me right now, and I should open it up to you guys, see if there are any thoughts, questions, reflections tonight.
Kevin, this is Mick in Kansas City. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. If you would allow me, I'm going to share. I'd like to share something as well. This is from AA Comes of Age. It's on page 81. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. It says, AA Comes of Age is another one of those books that nobody ever looks at because it's about history and nobody cares. But it says, to some of us, the idea of substituting good for God in the 12 steps, and this is Bill speaking, will seem like a watering down of AA's message. But here we must remember that AA steps are suggestions only. To believe in them as they stand is not at all a requirement for membership among us. This liberty has been made available to thousands of AAs who never would have tried at all had we insisted on the 12 steps as written. A minister in Thailand wrote, "We took AA's 12 steps to the largest Buddhist monastery in this province, and the head priest said, why, these steps are just fine. For us as Buddhists, it might be slightly more acceptable if you had inserted the word good in your steps instead of God. Nevertheless, you say that it is God as you understand him, and that must certainly include the good. Yes, AA's 12 steps will surely be accepted by Buddhists around here."
Sweet. Thanks, Mick. That's great. Yeah, I've heard that piece about good and God before, and yeah, and just hearing you mention, like, that's right. It was a Thai Buddhist, which is interesting. You know, I wish we could know who that was, but yeah, I think it's interesting to substitute, you know, just good. I think it also, I think love is a really good substitution for God in the steps. If you turn your will and your life over to the care of love, humbly ask love to remove our shortcomings, you know. Yeah. Thanks, Mick. Anyone else have any thoughts or questions tonight?
Hi, everybody. I'm Julie, a food addict. Very happy to be with you this Friday night.
Hi,
Just a
Julie.
I've heard a few times in the last few days the question, what would love have me do today? And just to tie back to what you were just saying. Also, I just finished the book called, and I'm the author is escaping me, but Refuge Recovery,
Yeah.
which which is recovery with Buddhism, which is very aligned with the 12 steps, but it is not the 12-step program,
Right.
and it avoids some of the terminology, etc. But it is aligned with what I see as the 12 steps, but it is Buddhist recovery through Buddhism. So, and that is, there are face meetings and online meetings of refuge recovery. And then I just want, for me, the book is written by by Christian white men,
Mm-hmm.
and there's just no escaping that. And I think what the Christian white men felt is that they were speaking in terms of, they thought that the 11-step prayer, what is known as the St. Francis prayer, even though it wasn't written by St. Francis, they saw that as a generic non-Christian prayer. The serenity
Right.
prayer, the roots of the serenity prayer is Christian.
Yeah.
It's, and I think a big, and I would love to see a rewrite actually of this biblical tome, but
Yeah.
I think we have used higher power all the way through without a male possessive pronoun would have been extremely helpful. And a lot of the people who have left the rooms of 12-step recovery because of that word God, that could have really been avoided, and it could be in the future. So that's just my thank you for letting me share my personal take on it. I have reconciled because I also go through the filter of Buddhism or whatever kind of ism helps me get past and gets me into the spirit of recovery and not the literalness of recovery, which have tripped me up. So thank you for letting me share.
Thanks, Julie. I really appreciate everything you're saying. First of all, refuge recovery, yes, a really valuable resource, and that program, and it has an offshoot program now called Recovery Dharma. Maybe not coincidentally, the next section of my book that we're going to go through is about the refuges. So I'll talk about that next week. But I really want to acknowledge what you're saying about the sexist language, and I, when I've talked about the steps, I've never wanted to rewrite the steps, but I don't. I think the word God is a workable word, but the word He is not a workable word, and I find it interesting to actually just replace God with it or they. If I turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understood it, that even just saying that like kind of twists my head in a way that kind of helps me. It's like, what? Oh, right. God has no gender. Like, why am I putting gender on God? It's a very human thing to do, is to say, oh, well, God is like us, so he's got to be a man or a woman or somewhere in some gender, and yeah, I mean, this is very much, what you're talking about also really relates to the I want to see if I can speak about this skillfully, that it's about like a dominant culture, that the dominant culture doesn't recognize that it's a culture. Like, white people don't realize that they're white, that they're a race, right? I mean, as we know, race is a construction anyway, but they're not sort of don't see that they've sort of got this view. So the people who created AA are kind of going, well, this is the norm, but we're going to give space for something we don't know about that's not the norm. We'll call it God as we understood it, which was a battle in early AA too. You know, that phrase wasn't immediately in the steps as I understand it. Mick, you might know more about that history of it, but my understanding is that there was, you know, that some people were kind of ready to walk out and said, you know, you've got to make more space in this language. So yeah, that dominant culture of AA is white, is male, is Christian, and it's blind to itself. You know, it's blind to that it is that. It just sees itself as the norm, and everything else is the other. And you know, okay, we're friendly to the other, but they're not really. You know. We're letting them come is kind of the idea, like, oh yeah, you can come too. I mean, in the beginning they weren't women, you know. So anyway, but I appreciate also really what you concluded with, which I think is the spirit that we all have to, I don't know if we have to, but I think is a skillful one, which is, in the end of the day, my addiction is something I have to deal with, and I have to find a way to deal with that. And if that means I have to, you know, kind of get over my frustration with language and culture to get what I need, that's what I'm going to have to do, you know, because if I go out and drink because I'm saying screw you to you sexist, racist people, it's not hurting them, you know, it's hurting me. So that's, but it's also an argument for, yeah, we need meeting, you know, we have, and as we do, we have meetings for, you know, for individual groups that feel safe, will feel safer, you know, just simply women's meetings, for instance, but obviously many other meetings, you know, that are more oriented towards people who are going to feel safe, not having to sit in a room where they're sort of feeling othered. So thank you for that. Anything, let's see. I think that's all I have to say, but I appreciate you chiming in. And it's about 8 o'clock. I told my family I was done at 8 o'clock because now starts family TV time, but we can hang out for a couple more minutes if somebody has something else they want to share. I like to take a little peek around the room to see who's here. Hi.
Kevin, can I say something?
Yes, please do.
I wanted to share, and good evening to everyone. Here is 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning in Amsterdam. I wanted to share that I just got a mail from a Vipassana retreat in Belgium, and they are inviting me because I applied like 3 months ago. So I'm gonna serve in the first retreat that is being opening, a 10-day Goenka retreat, Dhamma Payota. So I wanted to share that.
Where did you say that is, Ricky? Where is that?
In Belgium.
Oh, wow.
So I'm really excited to have gotten this email because I thought everything was canceled.
Yeah.
And so Dhamma Payota is, I think they are doing instead of 100 people, they are doing the 40 people sitting and then 10 servers or something. Like they are doing the half in the Dhamma hall to spread the people around.
Yeah. Good. Well, that's good to know. You know, we got to come back at some point. It's just, yeah, a question of how safe it is. I just sent Paula information about Venmo, and I meant to send it to everybody. Yeah, I was just invited to, asked to teach a retreat that is scheduled for me to teach in May, or I'm sorry, it's May, July, and yeah, at Garrison Institute, and they were like, yeah, we're creating protocols to do that, and if I were on the East Coast, I might consider it, but I don't want to fly. It just doesn't seem like a great idea, especially for an old man who has a cough all the time. All right, my dear ones, let's close with some metta practice.
Thank you, David.
Yeah. So may we keep our hearts open to the suffering of the world while protecting our own hearts as well. May our world find its way through this difficult, painful time. May we heal our bodies, heal our spirits. May we come to see love as our guiding principle, our higher power. May all beings be free from suffering. So just one other thing to mention, that next Friday night will be on the Spirit Rock Zoom. I have a link to that on my website. But I'll be here on Tuesday, and then next Friday, same couch, different Zoom. All right. So thanks, you guys. Thanks for coming. Take care of yourselves.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Kevin.
you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.